Joe Burrow has looked pretty good throughout minicamp, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it. Let's catch up on everything that's gone on the field for the Bengals throughout minicamp.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien, and we've been on this podcast on Locked On Bengals for so many years, I can't count them. 2016, back when this podcast started. You can find it now on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you're
Joe
new
Burrow
to
was
the
in
show,
diapers.
and you need to get on that everyday listening habit, hit that subscribe button. That'll make it really easy to make sure you don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals. Also appreciate all of you out there that make Locked On Bengals your first listen. James, last two episodes of our most recent week covering minicamp were really co-opted by increasing contract drama focused on Shamar Stewart. That will not be a topic of deep conversation, although it might come up in today's episode, making no promises there. But the goal for today is to focus on what happened on the field and revisit the coordinator comments about the players that are standing out and see how that meshes up with what you've observed from being there in person, watching these guys in one open practice a week for a while throughout the offseason program into the 3 open practices throughout minicamp itself before the summer break. We are now, of course, officially in that summer break for the Cincinnati Bengals, where we won't expect to really hear much from the team until the gear up for training camp. And so we'll have you covered, of course, when breaking news happens here on Locked On Bengals. But until then, we'll continue our regular schedule for this part of the year, which involves episodes going up to you on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. But James, without further deliberation, ado, let's talk offense. Let's start with the offense. Let's start with Joe Burrow, the engine for this team. We haven't talked a lot about what's happened on the field, and Joe Burrow quietly having a really nice offseason, and maybe quietly is why it's so nice, is that we're not wringing hands over Joe Burrow throughout the offseason program here in June.
As much drama and discussion as there's been, Jake, about all the non-football stuff and the business side, you're right. It's been nice because we've just gotten to watch Joe Burrow and not wonder, is he going to throw today? Is he not going to throw today? How's he going to look? Oh my goodness. Did he have enough velocity on that ball? How you feeling, Joe? And by the way, he's not completely past the wrist, still working his way through it. And I think it's interesting that he's just been so upfront about that. Certainly better today than he was 3 months ago, even. And we saw him play at the best year of his career. So he's fine from that perspective. But what I do think is interesting is kind of his evolution. And I talked to 2 Bengals veterans on the final day of minicamp after practice. And they were both like, yeah, he's making throws and decisions. Not that they're bad decisions, but they're more contested situations and tight windows that he doesn't usually make until training camp. And I think that's interesting that he's doing that, and that it's probably a testament to where he is and where he hopes to go. If you're getting from a throw standpoint, I'm not saying he's doing the same routine that he would in training camp, but if you're from a throw standpoint and an accuracy standpoint, you're seeing him take the chances and risks that he usually does in August, but he's doing it in June. Then I wonder what he's going to be doing over the next 5 to 6 weeks when everyone gets back in July, in August, and they're practicing in camp, because he knows that he can take it to another level. And I think we may be seeing that. And that's what's going to be really, really fun, is as well as he played last year, he was still dealing with the wrist. Still is to a lesser degree now. For as well as he played last year, I think he went back, watched, and said, I can do this, 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 and this better. And he hasn't really been specific on exactly what, because I think there are a bunch of different areas where he thinks he can improve. And at least to this point, veterans that have seen him have noticed a bit of a difference. And that's usually the way to gauge it is off camera conversation. Is this happening? And sometimes they'll just bring it up to you. And the two guys I talked to initially about it brought it up to me, not the other way. I wasn't like, oh, how's Joe looking? I was like, man, Joe was the other way. So I think that's pretty noteworthy.
Yeah, I think that his ability to get through this continuous, we'll go back to that word, this word continuity, that stood out when Joe Burrow talked early last week. Paul Dehner followed up and asked Dan Pitcher about that when Dan Pitcher spoke with the media the next day. And Pitcher spoke about that advantage and the idea that you have this group of skill players in this passing offense specifically, right? Because at this time of the year, getting a feel for what's different in the run game, the tweaks they've made in the run game, when pads aren't on, when there isn't live hitting, which you're never going to get live hitting, I don't think, in a Zach Taylor training camp. But when their pads aren't on, especially, you don't really get a good feel for, what's going on with the run game. Can't really figure that out at this time of year. But in the pass game, where we talked about the advantage of not having to catch up a rookie or be like, hey, yeah, you're learning the playbook. This is how we want things to work off script. And catching up how exactly certain routes should be run against certain coverages and certain concepts. Not having to do all that and having guys that Joe Burrow trusts and has that rapport with. That extends to Mike Gesicki. That extends to Chase Brown in the passing game. That extends to Andrei Iosivas in his third year. And we'll see how that emerges with Jermaine Burton, who no longer has that distinct pressure to be a guy that should be competing for starting snaps, at least not right away, at least not anytime soon, not in the foreseeable future. A lot of time on task with Charlie Jones at this point, who we'll see what happens and how much he's able to stay on the field. Every single weapon on this team, even Drew Sample, every single player that is an eligible receiver on this team, Samaje Perine, has a lot of time on task with Joe Burrow in this offense. So where they are, you're talking about trying to put the ball in different places, making throws that you wouldn't normally make at this time of year. Well, when you have that kind of continuity in your passing game, that can accelerate how you're working on things in the offseason. And you don't have as much catching up to do. Yeah, there's little tweaks to make here and there, sure. But when your core offense is what it is and it's successful and you have the same players, you can be more advanced earlier in the offseason. And hopefully that then pays those dividends, those continuity dividends, because they are hopefully ahead of the game right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that we can talk about Jermaine Burton and Charlie Jones to a degree and in kind of the supporting cast. When you have Andrei Iosivas, and it's easy to see that he's taken a step. Dan Pitcher saying, oh yeah, he's walking around with his chest out now. And that's much different than a year or two ago. Not that he wasn't confident. That's what I think is super unique. I think Andrei got in the building and early on as a rookie, they were like, oh, he's definitely not a 6th round pick.
Yeah.
Like this guy
pretty quick
can have, from a mental standpoint, physical standpoint, it didn't need to learn the nuance of the position to the level that they thought he would, being a Princeton wide receiver coming from that league and coming to this league. Obviously, they knew he was smart and athletic, but they didn't know it would happen that quickly. And so for that to kind of be cemented, and he's cemented as wide receiver 3 when I'm talking strictly about the wide receivers, and then Mike Gesicki to just be a safety net for Joe. And I saw that in 7-on-7 throughout the OTAs and certainly minicamp. It's like, all right, well, Joe's holding it. And like, if first read, second read aren't there, you're like, oh, well, he completed that pass. Who was that? And without even looking, you could usually guess when it was going to 88. And Mike Gesicki might have led them in reception, certainly close. I mean, obviously Jamar is going to be Jamar. And oddly enough, I think Charlie Jones had a bunch of catches from Joe. So who knows who actually led, but I do think that Gesicki is just picking up where he left off when they had to really rely on him in games last year and certainly at the end of the year when he was a big part of what they were doing. It's a great place to be, because then we can say, oh, well, can you imagine how Jermaine is going to fit or how Charlie's going to fit? And I think there's a bit more there, and certainly on offense, we haven't even mentioned a top 10 running back in the league. Not my words, but we'll get to it coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need for live events all summer long. And maybe it's the NBA Finals that are still going. Let's see if the Pacers can handle business. It's the app you need. I've had family members who've used Game Time. I've used Game Time to go to the Eastern Conference Finals. It was my first NBA playoff game. So whether it's sports, whether it's the NFL and the Cincinnati Bengals, and you want to get ahead of things with that week 1 matchup in Cleveland, it doesn't matter. Game Time makes getting tickets easy. They have killer last minute deals, panoramic seat views, no surprise fees. Game Time is a total game changer. And right now you'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts on scoring NFL tickets. So whether it's Bengals Browns, whether it's the home opener against the Jaguars, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Game Time, last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Want to talk about Chase Brown? Want to talk about Dylan Fairchild, the highest profile from the 2025 draft class, offensive rookie? Before we do, wanted to circle back to a player on offense that Dan Pitcher mentioned. James, you're talking about Mike Gesicki. You're also talking about, hilariously to me, I'm just going to take a jab at the Browns here, OTA stats and who leads in receptions. Have you seen the stuff like coming out of Browns camp, like the Shadur Sanders stat lines?
Yeah, ridiculous. Like I was just observing. I didn't keep track, but there are real stats with their 52 quarterbacks.
It's so funny.
I hope that they start Kenny Pickett.
But what I was going to say is going back to Mike Gesicki is the Dan Pitcher comment. Figured out how to really use Mike Gesicki when they had T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in the second half of the season. And that's what Dan Pitcher talked about. Like early in the season, it was, okay, we don't have T. Mike Gesicki can take some of that. Or, we have a game plan that is a Mike Gesicki. But then later in the year, they talk about, okay, now it's they're running double outside or something. They got doubles on, they got a bracket on T, they got a bracket on Jamar. Now that's where we can really exploit things with Mike. And so that level of continuity, again, to use that word, at the tight end position, which is something that we kind of have not seen with the Joe Burrow offense. They've been doing the rent a tight end thing every single year. This is the first time they have a consistent second year with a receiving tight end. Maybe we're making too much of that, and it's going to be a similar year. Wouldn't be surprised if it's somewhat similar from a productivity perspective for Gesicki, because he had some big games in lieu of T. Higgins at times. But if it's more of a seamless, not so up and down, like we have a consistent plan for Gesicki that we know how he can contribute on a week-to-week basis, that I think would be interesting, considering Pitcher's comments that they kind of figured it out like as they went last year. Now they don't have to figure it out again with a new player at that position.
Yeah, I think that is a huge part, because Gesicki is a weapon that you need to worry about. And last year, when you're talking 1-year deal, you can be like this little complimentary piece that is relevant some weeks and other weeks not. And that'll still be the case when you have weapons like they have. But they paid him to be a dude. And they're like, man, you fit. You're going to be a dude. Joe loves you. Joe thinks you're reliable. I mentioned the safety net part of it. I think that's a very real thing that we're going to see consistently this year. And that's when they can go to the next level, because you know that Mike Gesicki not just fits and has the skill set, but already knows A, B, C, D, E. So now you're already starting with that next letter. And in the moment the offseason program started, it wasn't like, oh, well, Joe wants you to stop here, turn here, all the little nuances and intricacies of work. You don't have to do that. And the fit, like, it's a great fit. So it makes sense. And it's going to be a big part of it, because we've seen both guys. Jamar Chase has been nicked up at times. Obviously, everyone knows about T. Higgins and what's happened. Those guys are going to get nicked up. But even if they're healthy for 17 games, it is great to have a big, long, athletic tight end that can make plays over the middle of the field, especially if you do run that double-double. Because you can run double-double. And Joe's like, all right, well, I'll throw it to 88. I'll throw it to 88 again. Okay, he'll
Or
have 12 catches today. Or, there you go. Or, go ahead.
I was going to say Yoshi, but specifically
Yeah.
Chase Brown is
I
where I
thought
was
you were
going
going to
finish this
Chase
off.
Brown.
I was going
Obviously,
to
Yoshi.
get there. We were going to get there, but you can't ignore Yoshi. But
No
yeah,
doubt.
Chase Brown in the receiving game continues to grow his role. He has a great understanding and awareness that that is what the offense is in Cincinnati. And while he might be this home run threat as a runner, and he is, if he can find a seam, he's got that speed. The focus that Chase Brown has continually put in over his NFL career so far in pass protection, in getting as much receiving work as he can possibly get, has earned him this praise from Dan Pitcher.
Yeah, I love it because Dan Pitcher, without blinking, said he's a top 10 back. Just without blinking. And it's like, man, like they view, and I think that would be considered a take in NFL circles right now, but maybe not 8 games in. Maybe you feel that way. Like maybe because if he takes another step, and what I think is interesting, you mentioned the receiving part of it. As a route runner, he's nasty. I mean, he's gotten really, really good at that. And when you have that ability and you're working out with Andrei Iosivas in Atlanta and running receiver routes and doing things like that to fit in an offense where they're obviously going to throw the ball all over the field. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what he can do as the full-time guy for a full season. And the pass catching part of it is a huge part of it, because it just gives Joe another answer. And if you give Joe answers, he's going to be able to combat it any which way. And that's the goal. That should be the goal of any offense that has Joe Burrow at quarterback. And a fun nugget that I learned, and some of you may know this, but regardless, Andrei Iosivas, Chase Brown, Charlie Jones, all 3 of them are going to be working out together basically for, I would say, 4 out of the 5 weeks that they're not in Cincinnati between now and training camp. And it's huge because I think Charlie's in a different place than those other 2 guys, but it's going to make him better. And I think all 3 guys are hoping to take a big step forward and help this team. And there's no reason to think that Andrei can't take a step forward, like you mentioned, or Chase. And for Charlie Jones, taking a step forward is going to be being healthy and contributing on offense when needed, and obviously winning that returner job. So we'll see if he does that, but a fun nugget.
Only so many targets to go around is part of it. That's probably keeping a cap on Yoshi and honestly Mike Gesicki. Like, people might be listening to this thinking, oh, I should definitely like make sure I'm targeting Gesicki from a fantasy perspective. And I'm not sure I would give that advice, especially with his career touchdown rate. Like, he's not a prolific touchdown scorer in the NFL. He hasn't been. He could be. Hasn't really been his game in the NFL. And just the structure of the Bengals offense kind of caps a little bit the non-Jamar Chase, T. Higgins productivity on a consistent basis, at least. But really cool to see the trust Joe Burrow has established with these guys. Part of the reason that he wanted Gesicki back, that Gesicki was on the list, obviously great connection with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. That should be the thing that is the bellwether for the offense. That's carrying the offense, right? And where we have the concern on the offense that we haven't really talked about as much as we otherwise could have, despite mentioning the veteran guard options probably at least once a week for the last couple months, is the right guard spot is shaking out to be a competition between Cody Ford and Lucas Patrick. The left guard spot seems like it's going to be Dylan Fairchilds. And I'm not perceiving a ton of competition there. And James, I'll let you fill us in on what's going on with those guard spots, those starting spots that are a little bit uncertain on the Bengals offense right now. Then we'll shift gears, talk about the defense and the newcomers on defense, who stood out to Al Golden and his comments to the media. We'll do that coming up next.
I'm not sure, Jake, that the Dylan Fairchild left guard competition is going to be a huge competition. It feels like he's got to earn the job. Like, that's a fact. But I think it's his job to fumble away. And I would give it basically the same thing as second round pick. And I'm not saying this is strictly from a mindset standpoint from the Bengals. When the Bengals selected Jackson Carman, they thought that he was going to start like that day on draft night. You agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not saying that Dylan Fairchild is Jackson Carman from a player standpoint, but strictly from a mindset standpoint. When they drafted Jackson, they thought he was going to start. I think that's the same thing here with Dylan Fairchild. And so Dylan would have to come in out of shape. That's not going to happen. Not improve. I don't think that's going to happen. You talk to, and I asked Dan Pitcher, like, how is he at handling making mistakes? And he gets really, really frustrated and holds himself accountable and wants to understand the offense and all of those things. And I think that's exactly what you need. And if he does that, there's no reason why he's not going to be the starting left guard. I think it's his job to lose by far. And I think he's going to win because he's going to do all of the muck and dirty stuff that you need, the dirty work on the field. And he's going to do everything he needs to do mentally to be ready. Doesn't mean he's going to be good, but he's going to put himself in position because he works hard. And I haven't heard anyone say otherwise. So I think Dylan Fairchild is by far the favorite. And early in camp, we could see the white flag from a competition standpoint. It would not shock me one bit.
Now, is that a good thing? Hopefully.
Yeah,
But
hopefully he runs away with it because he's awesome. Yeah.
But we don't really know yet. Like, it's very likely that Dylan Fairchild is going to win the job. We haven't seen him in pads in a Cincinnati Bengals practice jersey yet, period. And then we won't see that until a few days into training camp. They'll do their warm-up period in training camp. Then they'll get the pads on. We'll see him a ton in the preseason, I imagine. And we'll see how he looks there. He's a rookie third-round pick at left guard. Those guys can be good. A lot of times it takes him a little bit of time. If he can be okay, if he can survive his rookie year, much like, honestly, Amarius Mims survived his rookie year while showing those flashes and showing everything that he can be. And then it's just a question of, okay, you just need to do it a little bit more consistently. The game just needs to slow down for you a little bit. Normal rookie to second year jump kind of things we're talking about with Dylan Fairchild next year. Great. That's awesome. The right guard, we're going to continue to talk about the veteran options because the competition between Cody Ford and Lucas Patrick is potential Achilles heel. And I think that until proven otherwise, I think that is my perspective on the right guard spot right now. Those guys being the guys that are competing. We haven't heard anything about Jalen Rivers getting into that job, into that competition at all. Haven't heard Cordell Volson's name really once since we talked about his renegotiated deal, his pay cut. And so that's the offensive line. That's going to be a story come training camp, come preseason. Not a story that we have a ton to talk about now because of what they do in the offseason program. Yeah, they're one-on-ones, they're pass blocking drills, all that stuff, but can't get a good feel for that stuff until you're watching real football.
Yeah, it's the one-on-ones are big. I will say that I talked to, and I might have said this on last show, but I'll say it anyway. One veteran was like, man, Dylan is getting so many awesome reps now in these one-on-ones. And I don't think they were doing them last year at this time. And Scott Peters and Jerry Montgomery got together and were like, and this can be our segue to the defense too, got together and wanted to do them. And the guy, you can guess, probably have an idea of who it is, was like, oh, all you're doing is one-on-one blocking in this offense in a lot of situations. Yeah. It's like, you've got to be able to win that way. And so he's had so many more reps that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise with these one-on-ones. So hopefully that helps him. Hopefully it does. But I think he's made of the right stuff, and I think Dylan is going to be a good player. It's just, will it be this year? Mm-hmm. And how, you're right, can he survive? Can he be a little better than that even? Yeah, I wonder. That would be the hope as a starter, and so we'll see. But I do think he's gotten some valuable reps, and part of that is because the approach in the trenches in general, I think, has shifted on the offensive line and obviously on defense as well.
Maybe he blows away our expectations. We
Let's
would
do
we
it.
would all welcome that from a
Yes.
guard pick for the first time in
Wow.
a decade or longer. I don't know the last time a guard blew expectations away as a rookie. But on the defensive side of the ball, James Demetrius Knight, second round pick this year, talking about former second round picks, looks like a very likely starter. And we've got Al Golden really quite excited about Joseph Osai, quite excited about Cam Sample and where Cam Sample. I mean, the fact that Cam Sample has been full go in the offseason program, less than a year removed from an Achilles, and then Al Golden's talking about how much more athletic he is than he thought he would be at this point in his recovery.
Yeah.
Those are potential good signs because I thought Cam Sample was a solid, good piece of this defense last year at this time.
Yep.
Like Cam Sample to me last year at this time was he could really dig into Sam Hubbard's snaps. Like he could be better than Sam Hubbard this year. And we didn't get to see that from him because he got hurt. And so what were your takeaways on the defensive side of the ball? Those are the three guys that stood out to me the most from comments. Also seeing where guys in the secondary are ending up in coverage as the defense tries to disguise man. And I think you ended up with like Cam Taylor-Britt at safety on a clip that we saw just because of the way the defense is rotating. So those are some things that stood out to me, James. What about you?
Yeah, I think one that they're all in. They believe in Demetrius Knight a ton. I would agree with that. I think Logan Wilson is someone that and Al Gold mentioned this, just how well he's moving, how he looks. They're confident that he can be the dude in the middle of their defense. As far as the secondary is concerned, I think that's what really does stand out is how they're testing things. Doesn't mean it's going to be that way, but they're certainly testing things and they're trying to see what they got, where they have it, what they can do with these guys. And that's interesting to me. It's interesting because you do all of it without certainly the most talented guy in your secondary, Dax Hill, who's running, cutting, moving really well, expects to be cleared for training camp. And if he's not cleared like day one of camp, he could be cleared like day 3. Like I think it'll be early on. But knowing the Bengals, and they should do this, they're going to take it slow with him. They're going to ease him in. He's the ultimate guy that can do all of these things. We know he's super versatile. So how do they use him? How does he fit into the mix? That's going to be one of those training camp things to monitor, certainly. And even early in the season as they're feeling their way through it. But the Cam Sample thing is interesting to me because I thought that was a super underrated injury that got overlooked. Like Myles Murphy got overlooked last year in camp, McKinley Jackson in camp, and they missed the start of the season. And I think those guys got a ton of attention. But the Cam Sample one probably hurt, not just because he was out for the season, but early on when you were losing those games. I think he hurt even more so than those other guys because Sam Hubbard was nicked up and playing through something right away after getting hurt in camp. And it's like, yeah, that guy could matter. So yeah, I was hopeful for him, and I still am, and hopefully that optimism that Al Golden is saying and showing is real and can translate, because I do think Cam Sample can help this team and be honestly a significant part of their rotation in the trenches.
Al Golden seems like he would be a no-nonsense kind of guy. We don't know yet how exactly to parse Al Golden speak. So when Al Golden's coming out and fired up for Joseph Osai, does that mean anything, or is it Al Golden's pumping up his guys? We don't know yet. That's one of the interesting things about this, right? Is when he's talking about what's going on with his defense. We haven't heard enough from Al Golden or heard enough from Al Golden when we have evidence, video evidence that tells us something, right? So we got to a point, you get to a point of understanding with coach speak where you can watch a game and then you can hear the way the coach talks about the game.
Yep.
And then you can figure out, okay, this is how the coach is relaying his perspective, and you know what you've seen at that point. Lou Anarumo wasn't one to mince words. Not really. He had his favorites, and it wasn't always that his perspective was infallible or anything like that. But you kind of got an idea with Lou over his time in Cincinnati. We don't yet have that with Al Golden. So when we're hearing him talk up Joseph Osai, what's your take on Osai, because that was the most glowing of the praise, like excitement from Al Golden about Joseph Osai so far.
We'll see. Just because we've heard that praise for Osai, like I feel like that's something that we've been down this road, and
It's
so
just like a believe it when you see it kind of guy for you, huh?
for sure, especially with the injury history, it's a 1-year deal. We'll see, and I think what I think is really interesting is you get the praise for Osai, and Al did say I didn't mention every guy, all of those things, but then he doesn't praise Miles, and it doesn't mean anything.
Nope.
But maybe it does mean something.
Maybe.
That makes sense. Like, it could be absolutely nothing, but Miles Murphy didn't get brought up until he was asked about Miles Murphy. And he said, well, now's the time. And I think that's interesting. Doesn't mean he's not going to be a factor. Doesn't mean it's now isn't the time. Hopefully it is the time. Hopefully, and this is no disrespect to Joseph, hopefully Miles beats Joseph for the starting job and outperforms Joseph this year and is better. Now everyone's going to say, well, both. Well, obviously the best answer is both, and both guys just are awesome. But if you're picking one, you want the guy that's under contract next year and you invested a first-round pick in and you think has all this talent. So in an ideal world, Miles would break out before Joseph. But I think when you hear stuff like that and the first rounder doesn't get brought up, and Al doesn't care about that, but it's just interesting. That's all. You note that, because if that's being said in June and then in mid-August we're like, oh, 58's playing ahead of 99. Well, then then it's like, oh, well, remember what Al said. So we'll see.
Yeah. Something that we'll be keeping tabs on, obviously, throughout training camp. There's also some kind words for Chris Jenkins and I think McKinley Jackson. I think the most of the defensive line, Cedric Johnson, BJ Hill, even though BJ Hill's not practicing, I think most of those guys did get some sort of words of praise from Al Golden. But what did stand out, I think, and wanted to circle back to the Osai stuff. So interesting players to monitor as the pads come on in training camp and we start to see those rotations and we see these guys that are going to play more in the preseason. We've got a new training camp schedule that we didn't even get to talk about today, James. They're going to be practicing in the morning, which is something that we've at the end of now 2 shows in a row talked about, but not going to get to in a ton of depth. Excited to see that lower temperature at 10 a.m. than at whatever time they did in the afternoon. That was brutally hot.
3:30 or whatever it was. Yeah, the heat gets to Jake.
It sure does. We don't get that here. Not like that. Not like 100 degrees and a heat index of 120 or whatever it was.
Where does he live? Is it Canada?
It's a little bit cooler, a little bit more temperate.
Where does it live? Canada? Yeah, Canada.
From Cincinnati, to anyone hearing that for the first time.
I follow up with that every time. Went to Princeton.
Yeah.
I let them know.
For anyone hearing that for the first time at the end of this episode, from Cincinnati, spent my entire childhood there. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We'll continue to have you covered. Next episode, Tuesday evening, Tuesday afternoon, barring impending news. Until then, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.